say this is some of Mark's best storytelling. He loves intertwining stories so that each one casts some light on the other. And this is a great example. The healing of these two women is also related to the stories earlier in the chapter. Where Jesus calmed the storm, which symbolised the chaotic and demonic forces for those people. And then he healed the man possessed of demons once they had actually reached the other side of that lake crossing. Mark shows Jesus having dominion over the demons. And the healing of these two women follows straight on. You would have heard in the past of the importance given to the 12 years of suffering endured by the older woman, and the fact that at 12 years of age, the daughter of Jairus is now at the age of becoming a woman, and her life is being snuffed out. Some people get carried away, I think, and talk about the link with this number 12, you know, something to do with the 12 tribes. Are these women somehow representative of Israel? But let me remind you too, we make a case that the older woman would be poor and marginalised, while the daughter of Jairus would have been privileged and lived as a cared-for daughter in a wealthy home. The text does say that the woman had spent all she had on doctors and still suffered, so she was poor. Sometimes the sermon will make the case that it was while Jesus had stopped in order to care for the poor woman that the cherished daughter of Jairus died, and that both social classes were equally important to Jesus. Oops. Oh, I've lost a few pictures here. It must... No, I'm sorry. I had some beautiful pictures there of Jesus raising up the two of them. He holds the woman's hand and raises her. He holds the little girl's hand and raises her. But we're not going there today either. Over the years, we've made a lot out of the state of the older woman. We've used a text from Leviticus and assumed things about first century Israel. The text we've used says, if a woman has a flow of blood for several days outside the monthly period, or if her flow continues beyond her regular period, she remains unclean as long as the flow continues, and for 7 days after it stops. Anyone who touches her is unclean until evening. Anyone who touches anything she has touched will be unclean until evening. So we had assumed that she was outcast and marginalised, that she would not have been allowed to be in the crowd. And that's an idea that I've included in one of the poems on the order of service. It's been strong in my understanding of the story. But to be honest, Amy Jill Levine, a Jewish New Testament scholar who's done extensive research into New Testament times, says that life wasn't really that bad for women by that time. The ancient text from Leviticus was not observed that closely. And our text simply says, and I did have it up there, there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She endured much under many physicians and had spent all she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, if I but touch his clothes, I will be made well. There's nothing there about not being allowed to be there. But we never let a few facts get in the way of a good story. We're not really sure she had to stay home for 12 years without any contact with anyone, although it may have been so. It may have been that she would make anyone unclean who touched her for the rest of the day. And perhaps she would have been terrified of Jesus if she made him unclean. So this has been a long way to get around to what stood out for me this week. What I have pondered is the way Jesus stopped and insisted that she come forward. Why? The healing had happened. The woman had what she needed. And she may have crept up anonymously because she didn't want to interrupt Jesus in his important work. Maybe she didn't think she was worthwhile to him. But Jesus wanted more. Nathan Nettleton says, like an ambulance driver stopping for lunch on the way to an emergency, Jesus has stopped. Who touched me? Jairus is pulling on his arm. Who cares who touched you? Come on, save my daughter quickly before it's too late. But who touched me? She'd been busted. She hadn't meant any harm, hadn't meant to interrupt. But there's nowhere to hide. Somehow he knew. Somehow he reached out his hand. Daughter, you took a risk of faith, and it has paid off for you. Welcome back to the world of the healthy. Shalom. So she hasn't been shunned. She has been touched by one who knew why she was untouchable. She has been lifted to her feet and commended in public. She has been given his blessing. She has been offered healing beyond her wildest dreams. Social healing, emotional healing, public acceptance. But what I noticed was that he calls her daughter. He makes the connection. And now both women are daughter. Jesus creates a relationship with her. The healing is also to do with community. In our individualised culture, we have such a limited concept of community. We're in danger of losing our interconnectedness with all of humanity and with all of creation. So we lose our connection with God. At Bible study on prayer this week, we read again the Genesis creation stories, and I noticed afresh, God said, let us create humanity in our image. It's in our deepest understanding that the divine is not individualistic and we are not islands. In our full healing, we need the touch of Jesus that says, hey, come forward. Let me know who you are. You are worth so much more than a sneaky, quick touch of my clothes. Why settle for overcoming the main symptom of your unhappiness and then slip back into the crowd without daring to imagine how much more there could be? How often do we look for nothing more than something to make life a little more bearable from Jesus and his body, the church? So we come for a little touch to make life more bearable during the week. Do we think God has more important people and more important things to deal with? Surely there's a 12-year-old girl somewhere dying of hunger or disease who warrants God's attention much more than us. Who are we to expect Jesus to stop and take notice? So we slip through the crowd for a little touch to make life better and then slip off again, unnoticed, unimportant, unchallenged. unblessed, with our masks still in place, fear and shame and loneliness still wrapped around us. Jesus thinks you are worth more than that. There's nothing else that matters so much that Jesus would pass you by. Jesus wants to see you healed and whole, strong, confident, accepted, loved. He wants more, to do more than just close your wounds and stop the bleeding. He wants to lead you into a wholeness you couldn't have imagined. A fullness of life beyond your wildest dreams. And this is the good news that he came to share. And it's the good news we have to share. As Nathan says, if you slip off into the crowd, he will be left there with a tear in his eye, still asking, who touched me? Because he reckons you're worth waiting around for. And he's got so much more that he wants to give you. He wants you to follow him, learn from him, share the life and love and joy and suffering with him. He wants you to lay aside your fears, your shame, isolation. Join him in the wide open spaces of God's love and acceptance. It was a huge step of faith for that woman to step forward and identify herself. She put her life totally in Jesus' hands at that moment. But Jesus was calling her and the crowd and us to step out of one world into another. Step away from a world that divides between acceptable and unacceptable, insiders, outsiders, borders of false security, a world of fear and hostility and rules and punishments. Step into a new world where fear is taken away by the contagious power of love and mercy and truth and freedom. This is the context that we have pastoral partners, that we try to care for one another, that we try to care for the wider world and be community to others. In our caring as followers and friends of Jesus, we are to make this friendship relationship the heart of it, a touching place. So this is the hymn I've chosen to accompany the sermon today.